All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Wild Wisconsin Winter Web Conference. I'm Leah Langby from the IFLS Library System, and I am moderating the Small Libraries track today. And Jean Anderson is joining me today as co-moderator. So we're really glad to see you today. And our presenter for this session, who we're also really glad to see, is Sarah Kyrie, who is from the Blanchardville Public Library right here in Wisconsin, a very small library right here in our state. And she's going to be talking with us today about library work as piecework. And she will be answering questions at the end. And if you have questions, please be sure to put them in the chat or the Q&A section. So thank you, Sarah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. When I was asked a few months ago, I was very honored and very excited, and it has given me the opportunity to organize some thoughts that have kind of been percolating for many years about library work as piecework. So I think this presentation might have a slightly different tone than some others. It will be informational, but it's also going to be reflective and maybe even a bit meditative. And there'll be places within the presentation to kind of pause and reflect back on your own work too. So thanks for coming along for the ride, and here we go. Oh, I've got a spinning block. So I am Sarah Kyrie, and I am a small town librarian from the Southwest Library System, which is in the southwest part of the state in Lafayette County. And Lafayette County is known for having 0 stoplights and more cows than people. So I started off, I was in the Argyle Library for about a decade, and then have recently moved up to the Blanchardville, up as a North Library just last year. But they serve the same community and the schools, and they share a lot of the same resources. So it seems like serving the same group of people, and even some of the same library patrons come to this library. They're both really small towns, which is exciting to me. It's a libraries where they're smaller, but not lesser. And in some ways pack like even a bigger punch, because we are one stop for so many services. Job services, after school, story time, it all distills down to the library. And so today I'm curious if maybe Peace and Justice Center could also be included in that wide umbrella of things that we offer. So Rumi has a poem, The Persian Poet. Out beyond ideas of right and doing and wrongdoing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. And I was rhetorically wondering, maybe out in that field, there's a library, something we can ponder together. Dive into library services. I thought it would be helpful to explain how these ideas surfaced. How did we get here? How did I really start being curious about how library services were peace services? Well, this photo has no context to it except to myself. It's 2003. I'm 19 years old, and my partner is 21, and he's about to be deployed to the Iraq War with the Wisconsin National Guard. And he had joined naively under a Clinton administration to pay for his college. He grew up in a poor household and what we might now call an economic draft of why he joined the military. But so thinking that he'd never be deployed, but then there was this war on up and coming, and the Wisconsin National Guard was the first to be deployed. They had not even been deployed during the Vietnam War. So we were really surprised and we were really scared and we didn't know what to do. And we didn't have a lot of resources. No one had been in these in our shoes before. It was the very, very beginning of the war. And, the internet, I don't know, we didn't really use the internet that much back in the day. And we didn't know what to do. So off my partner goes to combat in Iraq. And basically, what unfolded were some of our greatest fears, um, physical injury, but also incurring moral injury and being part of situations and actions that he did not feel good about. Um, and there wasn't a lot of communication, just letters that could take months back and forth where I was hearing these stories and basically back in America holding my breath for this deployment. And so I was doing my own work of writing a lot of articles and being out there on the street and driving around in my little 1989 rusty Honda Civic that had a bumper sticker. What did it say? Stop Iraq. No, no war. I know, strange. Um, but a year of a lot of pain. And so he returns from the war, and we start to work on healing, and that pain also becomes into a lot of passion about speaking out against the Iraq war and things that soldiers had been asked to do kind of against their better moral judgment. Uh, Testifying in Winter Soldier, which is, they had something similar in Vietnam War, where soldiers express the war crimes and things that they have done, and a lot of fire, a lot of youthful fire, and connecting and hearing stories from other soldiers, hearing stories from past generations, Vietnam veterans, Korean veterans, hearing stories from families who are living with veterans, hearing stories from Iraqis and Vietnamese and other people who were affected as natives in war, and really drawing the conclusion that no one benefits. There's a lot of pain, and we refuse to be part of another silent generation. That mental health is something that should be spoken of and worked at repairing. Sometime in here, my heart's kind of shifted, and I really desired to go back to school and learn about peace studies. We spend a lot of time in school studying about military history, and I would argue that it's important we know just as much about peace history and the people who have across the globe who have led peaceful revolutions. And so I found a program in Fairhaven College, Western Washington University, that would support this and allow me to explore. And I ended up writing a thesis called Creating Global Change Through Local Choices, which is very similar to the topic I'm talking about today, making small ripples outward, which to me feels like the only sustainable way of making peace. And so now we've returned back to Wisconsin, our home state, about 15 years ago, and we have some lands and a stay place for veterans to come heal on the lands. And so I really think of the trifecta of healing through community and arts and lands, and that's what we're trying to provide. And so once a year, we have a huge gathering where we invite veterans and their families and children to come to our land, and we create art, a big art project together. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese monk, said, "Veterans are the light at the tip of the candle, illuminating the way for the whole nation. If veterans can achieve awareness, transformation, understanding, and peace, they can share with the rest of society the realities of war. And they can teach us how to make peace with ourselves and each other so we never have to use violence to resolve conflicts again." And this is a barn quilt that we made with the design we came up with together. And then over a 3-day weekend, everyone had an opportunity to paint on it. And it's essentially like a fist breaking an arrow saying, "We'll study war no more." And then in the summer of 2019, my family was invited to Habu, Japan to work at a summer camp. And my library board at that time was gracious enough to give me the summer off, knowing that I would return. And we had done other piecework in Japan over the years, which is a talk in and of itself. But this specific time was to work at a summer camp for children who were affected by the Fukushima nuclear disaster. And Habu is very far from Fukushima. It's about 8 hours away. It's north of Kyoto. But it's a retreat for these children who are called the second hibakusha. The first hibakusha being the survivors of the atomic bomb. And similarly, these children have a lot of health issues because of the radiation, and also a lot of cultural stigmatism. They can't really move. They'll never be able to move from Fukushima. The government kind of keeps people tightly restrained if they don't want them to move, and it'll be very difficult for them to be married because people don't really want to procreate with these kind of radiation issues. So the children come to this camp where there's specialized doctors, and I was there in the capacity of a librarian, which was really special. And so here I am reading with a translator, and it was an interesting summer to choose stories that both would speak to the children and that were translatable with a translator. And also just playing a lot of games and doing art projects and spending time without language. And so here we pause. I thought I'd insert some of these queries. Some of them I wrote. This one is borrowed from the Religious Society of Friends, or Quakers, which is one of the traditional peace churches. Also Mennonites, Amish, Brethren. And so they would automatically be exempt from being drafted, although they might have to do alternative service. And so the Quakers don't really have a creed, but more of a book of queries that help for inward reflection about how you're acting. And so here's one. How do I align my beliefs and actions? If you feel so led to write something in the chat, please do so. Or if you want to just write in a journal or just have a moment of contemplation. Brings us back to the library. First ripple. Oh, I see these chats. Thank you. You first need to know what you believe. Thank you, Carly. So I want to ask, what if what we are doing right now in our library work ripples out beyond what our eye can see? And what would that first ripple be? I think the first ripple is our personal connection when we see people entering into our library. And so I was drawn to this poem by Naomi Shihab Nye, The Red Brocade. The Arabs used to say, when a stranger appears at your door, feed him for 3 days before asking who he is, where he's from, where he's headed. That way he'll have strength enough to answer. Or by then you'll be such good friends you don't care. Let's go back to that. Rice, pine nuts? Here, take the red brocade pillow. My child will serve water to your horse. No, I was not busy when you came. I was not preparing to be busy. That's the armor everyone put on to pretend they had a purpose in the world. I refuse to be claimed. Your plate is waiting. We will snip fresh mint into your tea. So often I think that uh, managing a library is very similar to being a hostess. Um, our patrons come in, and are we preparing to be busy, or is that the armor that we're putting on? I know often we are busy, but intentionally, I try and take a moment where I move my eyes off of that circulation screen, make eye contact, connect with our patrons, call them by their first name, and um, snip that fresh mint into their tea. I know that the personal connection is a reason why many people come to our library, just like our local cafe where people go to talk with the waitresses and have coffee and pie in the morning. They come because of our friendly, welcoming spirits. And this also speaks for the children. I think one of our most important roles is simply being the kindly adult presence. In the past year, our community has had 2 incidences with school shooters. And as we all kind of wrap our heads around how to go forward with this, I know it's a multi-tiered issue, but I can see in my little world, what I'm trying to do is have the children be seen, and that the library feels like a safe place with an adult who wants them to thrive. We have a couple non-binary kids, and there was sort of some incident at the school where there's a teacher who doesn't want to refer to children by the pronouns they choose. And they were the same kids coming into the library. And so it's just one example of how it was really a time where it felt electrified in our community. And I really felt like what we could provide was a space where they're being seen as an individual. Biggest passions in library work is programming. And so I thought I'd share some programs as our ripple starts to move outward. And again, these are kind of a combination of programs that I've done in Argyle and Blanchardville over the years. So it's so fun to be in a small town, fight the world in. And so I'm constantly have my feelers out for what kind of programs could we bring in that would just might have a little bit of a different flavor than what we're used to. Here's one where we had a Brazilian capoeira group come in, and which is kind of a combination of martial arts and dance with drumming. And I just ran into them in Madison and said, hey, would you ever consider coming out to do a library program? And their interest was piqued. And so I love to make those connections. And then kind of there's an excitement of building up that program, put it on the calendar, getting the PR, finally bringing them into town and seeing your people around for just something new. This is kind of an easy and fun program of just providing a green screen in the library. For this one, we took pictures of people from around the world. And I think anytime we can break down the other and make a personal connection, then we're breaking down, us and them. And so this is just a green screen, but maybe if someone feels like they were in a picture and I can send them home with a picture where they were there, then that breaks down that us and them. And I also like to include this picture because here in the middle is Carol McDaniel, who was a library director in our library system for many years, and she and her husband. So it was fun. She came to that program. Food is such an easy, fun way for people to make connections. We all like to try new food. On the left is a program that we had last year for the Olympics, where we had lots of snacks from around the world, and you don't even have to go to the grocery store and like try and find an assortment of things. I literally bought a box of snacks from around the world, and then we had a sheet where you could write what you liked, what you didn't. Do you like hard boiled egg potato chips? Do you like cola flavored gummies? Um, and then on the right in Argyle, we invited food trucks to come in front of the library. There's just a handful of restaurants in our area, and they more or less have the same menu. So to get some new flavors, and the library didn't pay for that food, but we organized it. So invited them in, did the PR for it, also had a little program going on outside during it. This they didn't have a food truck per se, but they set up a table, and they were wildly popular. And then in the middle is a program that's going on right now, actually, where we have a spice of the month, and I put it in tiny little packets that I bought and included a little recipe book I made of 3 or 4 recipes, and they're just free to take. And so this month we're doing za'atar, which is a Middle Eastern spice with thyme and sumac and sesame seeds, and we've had a lot of great response too. Program we did in Argyle, where we had a full kitchen, which in my perfect world, every library would have a full kitchen, because we made stone soup and we had a whole program around it. I had a couple people volunteer to be kind of our kitchen managers, and people, in stone soup, an old folk tale, everyone adds something to the pot, including a stone. And as it simmers, even though people didn't feel like they had a lot to offer, collectively, they had a feast. And so that's what we did. And people brought in corn, meat. We had a vegetarian and a meat soup, different veggies, different spices. And so while it was simmering, we read stories and sang songs and things like that, and then had soup. And I'm not even joking you. This stone soup that we had was probably one of the tastiest things I've ever had in my life. So we'll pause here, and maybe you'd like to share what kind of programming have you created to create community and togetherness? I hope you can all read the chats too. So thank you everyone for your input and sharing. Slow down, think before I speak. Always try to do the right thing, my right thing. Try to apply compassion and imagine people complexly, meet people where they are. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Cooking class, movies for seniors. They become a group of friends. Sorry, I'm doing a program here. Thank you all. Next to community art projects, which I consider power with. So I think there's different models of power. Power over, which is, kind of a domineering kind of power. Power for, which might be a parent for a child, and power with. And community art can be a great way to do that. So there's this amazing concrete turtle in Argyle that as part of the playgrounds. And so we had a community art project where people made a square of, they knit or crocheted a square of yarn. And then we had some volunteers put it into a scarf that was 35 feet long. And there was so much response because everyone could see it from the road. Um, and these kids actually are all in college now, which is wild, but they still remember. And in fact, there was an updated historical book about our area and with some changes, and this picture made it in it. This is a program that I've done twice now, and I was just thinking about maybe doing it again this summer because it was so popular of doing indigo dye. And basically you buy the dye and it creates 5 gallons of dye. I did buy the pack. I had one patron think that maybe I grew the indigo. And I said, oh, I love you guys. I did not do that much work. But the first time we did it was during COVID with those white masks that the health department had donated to us. And you rubber band them, you dip them in the dye, they kind of oxidize in the sunshine and change color. And so you can see it right before your eyes. And it's just like a magic trick. And then maybe 2 years ago, we did this again at the park and invited people to bring clothing, whatever. We had 78 people come. So in a town of 800 people, that's a pretty good percentage where it just turned out. I see people wearing indigo dyed clothes everywhere. And it's a sweet connection of like, you were there that day too. Yes, and is improv concept where we say yes to a friend's idea and build upon it. Well, for some reason, making paper chains has been so hot in our library right now. I mean, you get a paper cutter, you get a stapler, and these kids all just rush to the library after school and they make paper chains. And so, kind of with that, yes, and so do you want to try and string them up around the whole entire library? And so we've been working on that. I get out the ladder, but they're very, very excited about this project. So, and they have some ownership around it too. Okay. Revisiting history and the library's responsibility here. So the Tinker Tour was a program that we did in 2019. Perhaps you remember this from your high school textbooks. Mary Beth and John Tinker were teenagers who were involved in a Supreme Court case having to do with the First Amendment, where in the Vietnam War, they had worn black armbands around their arms and then were suspended from school, maybe even expelled for this. And they continued to argue it through the court system until they got their First Amendment rights and were ruled that you can indeed wear something in protest at school. So they were on tour, a 50-year tour of this Supreme Court case. And I saw it and I was like, I want to bring that to our town. So collaborated with the school to bring it as an assembly. And Mary Beth Tinker spoke in front of the crowd, shared her story, and really kind of fired up the kids. I'm not going to lie. I had the principal giving me side-eye glances because she was like, what are you angry about? How are we going to do this? How are we going to organize? But it was really special. And I know it affected kids to have that part of history brought to our small town. And in fact, I always like to share this with librarians too, because later on in the annual report, after I'd submitted it, the DPI contacted me and they were like, hey, I think your numbers with your teen programming might be off. What is this? And I was like, oh, I did it at the school. You know, clearly I'm not going to get 350 teenagers to come to a library program. But is that okay? And they were like, oh, yeah, that's great. So don't forget about the possibility of just having your library program during school hours for the kids and reaching so many more. We live right on the Pecatonica River and very near a site of the Black Hawk War. And there's a place not too far from us called Bloody Lake, where a very influential battle happened during the Black Hawk War. And essentially, 18 Indigenous youth, they were really just teenagers, were slaughtered. And there's a sign commemorating it that feels it's a bit antiquated. To paraphrase, is like, this is the land that we, you know, made secure our home from the native people. And so for a long time, I'd kind of been rolling around what is the response, or how as a community can we continue the conversation without erasing any memory. And so between the library and the local historical society, we'd collaborated on a lot of other more Eurocentric events, we decided to host an Indigenous Peoples Day. And we really took the advice that like white people in our situation should do a lot of the legwork about creating an event and then hosting Indigenous people to share their story. And this program was probably a year in the making. We had a huge tent at the river basin of the Pecatonica River near Bob La Follette historical site, where we know a lot of Indigenous trading happened every summer. It was a very fertile land. And so we hosted Indigenous speakers for the day. We had food trucks, we had vendors, and we had dancers. This whole dance group came up from Illinois, and they were so generous with their time. They danced all afternoon and shared with people and drummed with people. Janice Rice spoke. She's a retired librarian from the university, but shared about her Ho-Chunk culture and family background. And then we also had Ernie Bostwich speak, who is an architect, not an architect, archaeologist, and spoke to that. And so it was an amazing day. Sometimes you have to be careful. Well, it's not an annual event. People were very excited and hoped that it was an annual event. It took a lot of work. Maybe we'll do it again down the road, but it was very successful after a lot of planning and work. So we'll pause here and just ask ourselves, am I honest and faithful when gifted with the trust of others? To be mindful of my time too. So, and how can we use the library as a portal for service in our community? Again, just thinking of that ripple going outward. We have an after school club where we get a lot of kids who come in around 3:30 to 5. And so in this event, we compiled bags that that were resources for anyone who might be needing them. It had like a hat and a toothbrush and snacks and a COVID test and Band-Aids and the kids, and we put them around town, and they've gone, no questions asked, no questions asked. There's something in the library. And the kids also wanted to know if they could carry one in their car to give to people who they see on the street corners. And that was their idea. And we probably made 3 or 4 dozen. So it was exciting to like see their sense of service expand, and just to do again that yes and sure. We've also had mending programs where we've had volunteers who bring in their sewing machines, and community members can bring in clothing that needs mending. For the most part, it's pretty simple for our volunteers. A lot of times it's just a stitch of a seam that needs to be fixed. They drew the line at zippers. And actually tomorrow we're having a darning program called Darn It, where we're inviting people to bring in sweaters and socks, and we'll have a tutorial on how to darn things and mend them. So much intersectionality about sustainability and environmental work and community work. And when we all do better, we all do better. And then this was a fun program that we did for years of caroling around the holidays, where I had purchased about 2 dozen songbooks and we caroled around town as a program. We went to houses. We also went to retirement community. We also went to the bars. We also went to the gym and sang to people on the treadmill. And I think it infused a sense of community. Also, there was a homeschool group who wanted to use these books every year that we coordinated with afterwards. So I didn't keep them on the shelf all year round. I kept them in the back. They were Christmas related, but I knew that I'd get at least 2 uses out of them. Yeah, and a query. What sources of strength support me? And that was kind of like our opening question. Family, library colleagues, nature. Ooh, Megan, I'm sorry I missed your question there earlier. Could it be annual if traveled libraries around, like for the Indigenous program, maybe? Um, oh, I'm catching up on all the chats. Thank you all. Thank you. Heart is warmed reading them. Okay, then it leads us to the bedrock of our institution, books. And I have this shirt that says "Fight evil, read books," which made me think I really have to know the answer to that. How do we fight evil? By reading books. Well, I think of story time as our lowest hanging fruit, that smallest ripple going outward. There's just so many great books that, of course, are right on the topic of being kind to people and working together and truly believing that, teaching people how to regulate their emotions is crime and addiction prevention. I think about famous librarian Michael Threets, who says, library kids save the world. And I believe that. Here we have a whole foundation of being believed in and being empowered. And also, can we just pause on that term, famous librarian? We know that reading is an empathy engine. Reading allows us to see and understand the world through the eyes of others. A good book is an empathy engine. Chris Riddell, or maybe Rydell, UK Children's Laureate. And reading can help us lift up silenced voices, bringing truth to power, which was a saying that I knew for many years, but I didn't know who to attribute it to. And that's by Bayard Rustin, who was one of MLK's right hand organizers for the March on Washington and many other things, but himself largely silenced because he was a gay man. So worked behind the curtain many times. But of course, books and literature have that possibility to lift up silent voices. So this was my sister largely helped to bring in the author Mossab Abu Toa from Palestine to the Wisconsin Book Festival this past year. He's a Palestinian who has been writing his poems on Instagram with a great following, and then of April last year was tortured and escaped and is now living in New York. And so brought him to Madison, and there was just a great response of people who wanted to hear his story. I mean, overwhelming. The hallways were packed of people who couldn't get into his reading. And I was just the helper to the fixer, but it was an honor to be part of. We also brought a program, Read Palestine, to our library, and it was largely informational about Palestine being in a war zone right now, where there was even a family who came from Madison who had recently moved from Palestine with 3 kids, and they shared about growing up there. And we had olive tasting, and we did henna on our hands. And there was a huge response. We had a great crowd of people. Prior to this program, I had been curious if I would have any pushback. And so had kind of prepared for that conversation and had done an informal audit of past programs and books on the shelf. And the fact of the matter is, there's a whole lot of books and past sharing about Jewish culture. And so this really was just a matter of sharing all voices. And the Palestinian voice was just a very tiny fraction of what we've done in the past. But no pushback, just amazing response. People drove over an hour away because they heard about this program, and were just so excited to be able to have a conversation in an open place. And then, of course, our sacred right of just to protect the confidentiality and the right to read of whatever readers want to explore. And that we will house that spirit of curiosity without judgment. I met someone recently who was not from library world, but they found out that I was a librarian. They said, "Oh, I'll just never forget about how librarians stood their ground when the Patriot Act was being passed." And, that was a few years ago, but people remember. People remember that we are not willing to bend for intellectual freedom. And then I also just wanted to briefly discuss like the responsibility that we have with our buying power. Here we are entrusted with budgets from our municipality, and how do we want to spend them? So here, this little graphic says feeling peaceful and thinking about money is a rare overlap, but I think it's possible. And I like to say that the choices that I've made with the budget, I try to do so intentionally. So keeping it local if I can. I don't have a bookstore in my town, but in my wider community, I do have local bookstores and have made many purchases through them over the years versus a larger bookseller. About summer reading prizes, are there stores in my town where I can purchase those from? I just purchased a ton of snacks from our local grocery store. Could I have gotten them cheaper at Costco? Quite possibly, but I made that choice to buy them from our local grocery store because I'm trying to keep that tax money as local as possible. And sometimes our local businesses, will offer a deal or something, but also I don't want to presume that. I want to lift up those businesses and help them thrive. And I also think about my book buying budget, and could it be a small reparation of history? When the books that I purchase, are there people of color's voices? Are there queer voices? Are there voices from people of other countries? And every time I make a purchase, I try and include one of all of those, slowly diversifying the collection. Oh, here's one we could talk about all day. What books have inspired empathy? All of them. American Dirt. The Hate You Give, Palestinian Walks, A Civil Action. Yeah. It's the nearest way to walking in someone's shoes, isn't it? But what if things go awry? And here's a day that when a tree fell on my house in a storm. But, they're the things that keep you awake at night, thinking about book bans or feeling like maybe your community wouldn't be understanding our mission. And so I asked myself, how am I going to react? And first, just starting, well, I'm going to go back. First, just starting again with that. Backwards, I'm going forwards. That inner voice of integrity, asking myself, am I acting within integrity? Am I acting within my job description? Am I doing what's being asked of me? Okay. Well, if yes on that, then everything else has been a misunderstanding or an honest mistake. And also remembering that we probably, on both sides of the discussion, are wanting the same thing. We want a healthy and safe future. We want our children to thrive and grow up in a good way. We're just looking at it from slightly different angles. I also take comfort in my policy of requests for reconsideration. When I moved to a new library, this is something I brought with me because I've worked so hard on it. Knowing that if people have concerns with the library, that there is going to be this checks and balances so that we fully understand what their concerns are. Are they actually a library patron? We're only going to take on one request for reconsideration at a time. The book is essentially innocent until proven guilty. We're not going to take it off the shelves. I haven't had to use this yet, but I am so glad that I have. And I did not have a picture of a roaring lion. I only had this sad picture of my dog feeling, why do I have headphones on me? But my voice feels tiny, and I'm sure so does yours. But put us all together, make a mighty roar. I draw so much comfort from you, community, from the people, the patrons who understand our library service mission, from everyone professionally who I know we have each other's backs. And even if there's going to be dissent in front of us, I feel great comfort from our community. Get through this. I think this might be our final question, but how do I maintain or regain inner unity when I experience conflict? Thank you. There's so many questions and fun things to touch in here. Briefly, Sarah, a lot of the budget supports programming, but I'm always writing grants too and taking donations and things like that. And so I just want to lift up that fire, in order to be hot, needs oxygen and space to breathe. And for us to do this work sustainably and for the long run, we have to take care of ourselves. And finally, we are in a profession that gives people radical permission to rest. I think about why people don't use library services. One thing I hear is, I don't have time to read. And so I love that reading gives us an a reason to rest. And certainly curling up in my bed with my book is my safest, happiest place. I want to demonstrate this for our library patrons as well. Surely as reader advisory, of course, but also that we don't need to be a martyr with our work, and that our ability to rest fuels us and makes us stronger. So here's our last queries. In what ways do I rest? Rest as resistance is something I'm exploring this year. I love the perspective that this job helps me spread it to others. Thank you, Emily. Step away, allow some time to pass, look at the situation honestly. Yes. Intentionally leave work at work and home as resting space. Yes. Yes. Okay, so to conclude, I wanted to share one of my greatest sources of strength, which is singing. And in the past few years, there's just been this revolution of community singing that's happening. And if we were all in the same room together, I would be leading you in song because it's so fun and so joining with others. But unfortunately, Zoom does not lend itself very well to voices together. So we'll do that another time. But I thought I'd share this great song by Mom Muse, which is a group of two women, but they really create music as community music, music to be sung in a group to lift up. And it could be sung call and response, but again, you can sing in your office or I'll just sing to you. And I thought it spoke to our discussion today. There is work to be done. There is work to be done with these hands, this heart, this mind. There is work to be done. There is work to be done. I am on your side. These hands are strong. This heart is wide. This mind. These hands are strong. This heart is wide. This mind is wide. I'm on your side. And then the last part just goes joyfully, 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 joyfully. I am on your side. And so I know a lot of what I've shared is what libraries already do best at, but I think there's power in naming things. And so if you take anything from this talk, I just want you to name library work amongst all the other services that you do, also as piecework.
Oh, Sarah, I just had to collect myself here. That was just beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. I'm guessing I'm seeing a lot of hearts and beautiful and yay in the chat. Someone saying thank you. I'm thinking in a new direction now. So that was just such a beautiful way to finish out this small library track. I'm wondering if anyone has any additional questions that you want to ask Sarah right now. Mostly, I think people are just letting that experience settle into their hearts. So that was lovely. I'm just going to allow just another little space here in case folks have a question. I don't know if I'm the only one, but I definitely found that I was glad I was in an office with my door shut because I was wanting to weep quite a bit in a very good way. So thank you. Someone speaking at church, and that this helps them think about their work as piecework. And yeah, excellent. Lots of beautiful, beautiful responses. So
Thank you all.
yay. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with us, and the thought and intention that went into holding this space for us to really reflect about our work and um, about the world. And as back to logistics, there will be a very short survey at the end of the webinar. So thank you to everyone for coming today, and a reminder that our final track, the closing session, will be coming up right at 2:30 today. So please join us for that. You can find details on the Jean put a link to the chat in the chat to that if you are interested. So I hope you can all have a moment to just breathe and connect with yourself to round out this hour. And thank you all, and thanks again, Sarah.
Thank you
Take
all.
care.
Thank you.